He had everything a college student could dream of. A good school in the city, a small apartment he could call his own, and ambitions that stretched higher than the skyline outside his window. But Ryan Carter had one problem: his mind never stopped running. He could start 10 things in a single day and finish none. When he tried to study, his focus slipped away. The moment he opened a book, he thought about music. When he listened to music, he thought about social media. When he scrolled through social media, he thought about all the things he should be doing instead. It was endless. His thoughts moved like restless birds trapped inside a cage, loud, quick, and never still. If you've ever felt like your mind keeps spinning, even when your body is exhausted, you know exactly how Ryan felt. His apartment sat on the edge of downtown Chicago. It was small, cluttered, and filled with reminders of half-finished goals, a messy desk, cold coffee cups, crumpled papers, and sticky notes covered in motivational quotes that had long lost their power. Every night he promised himself that tomorrow would be different. And every morning, he broke that promise. The day always began the same way. The alarm blaring. The scrolling. The notifications. A few quick messages. Then another scroll. By the time he looked up, the morning sun had already moved across the window, and half the day was gone. He wanted to focus. He truly did. But silence made him uncomfortable. Quiet made him think about all the fears he tried to bury: the fear of failing, the fear of being ordinary, the fear that maybe he didn't have what it took to succeed. So he filled every empty moment with noise, pretending he was busy, when really, he was just avoiding himself. Sometimes we don't realize how afraid we are of our own silence until we have to sit in it. One cold November afternoon, Ryan sat in the corner of a crowded campus cafe. His laptop glowed in front of him, a half-written essay blinking back like a quiet accusation. He typed a few lines, deleted them, sighed, and stared at the empty screen. Around him, the world buzzed: laughter, espresso machines, footsteps, the endless chatter of people with somewhere else to be. He tried to block it out. He couldn't. He told himself he'd focus after one more coffee. Then after checking one more message. Then after watching one short video. But he never did. By the time night fell, his essay was still half done, and guilt sat heavy in his chest. The hardest battles aren't the ones people see. They're the quiet ones, the battles between what we intend to do and what we actually do. Ryan wasn't lazy. He was lost in a storm of distraction. Weeks slipped by in the same blur of effort and avoidance. His grades began to drop. He failed another test, not because he didn't know the answers, but because he couldn't finish. His mind kept drifting during the exam, trapped in thoughts about failure before the paper was even over. The red marks on his test paper stung, but what hurt more was knowing he could have done better, if only he could focus. After class, he wandered into the library, not to study, but to escape. The air inside was calm, the kind of calm that makes you breathe slower without realizing it. That's when he noticed him. An old man sat by the far window, reading a thick, worn book. His hair was silver, his posture straight. Every few minutes, he took a sip from a small thermos and turned the page with deliberate patience. Ryan had seen him before: Professor William Alden, a retired philosophy professor who still visited the campus sometimes. There was something about him that drew Ryan's attention. While everyone else rushed through their day, this man seemed untouched by time, completely absorbed in what he was doing. Not distracted, not restless, just still. Outside the glass, traffic roared and students hurried by, but inside that quiet corner, the professor sat as if the world had forgotten him, or maybe, as if he had learned to forget the world. Ryan couldn't look away. He wondered how anyone could sit that still without a phone, without noise, without distraction. It felt almost impossible. The next day, Ryan's restlessness returned. He couldn't focus in class, couldn't study, couldn't stay off his phone. That evening, he went back to the library. Maybe for peace. Maybe for answers. Professor Alden was there again, in the same spot by the window, the same steady rhythm to his movements. This time, Ryan sat at the opposite table, pretending to study, but his eyes kept drifting toward the old man. There are moments in life when the right person appears just as you're about to give up. They don't save you. They simply remind you who you can still become. Ryan sat there longer than usual, watching the professor turn another page. He looked content, as if the rest of the world no longer had power over him. Ryan wanted that. That calm. That control. The following evening, Ryan found himself back in the library again. He didn't plan to be there, his steps simply carried him. The professor was there too, sitting in his usual seat. A small pocket watch rested on the table beside him, ticking softly. For some reason, the sound caught Ryan's attention. It was rhythmic, steady, peaceful. He sat down across from the old man and listened. The professor looked up and gave him a small, knowing smile, one that said he understood more than Ryan had spoken. There were no introductions, no long explanations. Just a quiet moment that felt heavier than words. The old man picked up the pocket watch, let it tick between them, and said gently, "Focus is not about the absence of noise. It's about choosing what you give your attention to. The world will always be loud, Ryan. You just have to decide what deserves to be heard." And just like that, Ryan's heart stirred. The words felt simple, but they carried weight. They stayed with him long after he left the library. That night, Ryan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment. The hum of the city outside his window blended with the ticking of his cheap wall clock. For the first time in a long time, he listened. He really listened. The world was still noisy, but for the first time, the noise didn't feel stronger than him. Sometimes, change doesn't begin with a plan. It begins with awareness. The moment you realize your mind is wandering is the same moment you take the first step toward mastering it. Ryan didn't know it yet, but his life had already started to shift. Because that night, as he drifted off to sleep, one quiet thought settled in his mind: maybe focus wasn't something he'd lost. Maybe it was something he had to learn to protect. And that was the beginning. Ryan returned to the library the next evening with a mixture of curiosity and hesitation. The city streets had a grey chill to them, and the usual noise of traffic and distant sirens felt sharper than ever. He couldn't shake the thought of Professor Alden's words from the night before, the idea that focus wasn't about removing noise, but choosing what to pay attention to. When he walked into the library, he saw the professor sitting in his usual spot by the window. The pocket watch was there again, ticking softly. Ryan felt a strange mix of intimidation and hope. This man seemed so calm, so unshakable. How could someone simply choose focus when the world screamed for attention every second? The professor gestured for Ryan to sit across from him. No words were exchanged at first. Ryan watched the steady rise and fall of the old man's breathing, the rhythmic ticking of the watch. After a moment, the professor spoke, not as a teacher, but almost as someone inviting Ryan to discover something for himself. Focus is like a muscle. You don't notice it until it's weak. And when it is, it feels impossible to control. The trick is to start small, before trying to lift heavy burdens. Ryan listened, unsure whether he understood, but willing to try. The professor handed him a simple task. He placed a glass of water on the table and told him to hold it with both hands, to keep his eyes fixed on the water's surface, and not let a single drop spill while walking across the library. Ryan laughed quietly, thinking it was a joke. How hard could it be to walk a few steps holding water? But as soon as he tried, he realized it was far from simple. His mind wandered. He noticed a group of students laughing in the corner, the clock ticking, the sound of pages turning. Every distraction caused the water to wobble. By the time he returned, more than half the water had spilled. The professor didn't scold him. He simply said, "Control doesn't come from force. It comes from awareness. The glass is your mind. The water is your focus. Every distraction is the world trying to pull you away. If you don't notice, you spill everything before you even realize it." Ryan felt a shift inside. It wasn't just about water. It was about his thoughts, his habits, the endless scrolling, the procrastination, the anxiety that came from never finishing what he started. Over the next few weeks, the lessons became a rhythm. Each evening, Ryan arrived at the library, and the professor had a new exercise. Sometimes it was physical, like balancing a stack of books while walking or sitting silently, counting breaths. Sometimes it was mental, like focusing on a single paragraph of a textbook without letting his mind wander. Each task seemed small at first, almost trivial. But the professor explained that mastery came from repetition, from noticing the mind's movements, from training it like a muscle. At first, Ryan struggled. His mind resisted, bouncing from thoughts of unfinished homework to texts from friends. He felt restless, frustrated, even embarrassed. But he kept returning. Even when he failed, even when he felt nothing was changing, he kept showing up. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the world shifted. He noticed when he was distracted. He could catch a wandering thought and gently bring it back. He started finishing assignments faster. He remembered details he would have forgotten. He didn't feel as scattered. He felt a small, quiet pride every time he succeeded in holding his attention. One evening, the professor asked him to close his eyes and imagine his life 5 years from now. The apartment, the job, the city, the friendships, the dreams. Then he asked Ryan to imagine those years wasted, endless distractions, half-finished projects, missed opportunities. The contrast was sharp. Painful. Ryan realized focus wasn't just an academic skill. It was survival. It was freedom. Every time he allowed his attention to slip, he gave away part of himself. Every time he disciplined his mind, he reclaimed it. Outside, the city roared with life, taxis, construction, voices, neon lights flashing through the library windows. But inside, Ryan felt calm, steady. He could sit for longer stretches without needing to check his phone. He could read a page of a book without his thoughts racing elsewhere. The professor didn't praise him much. He simply said, "Keep going. Discipline isn't instant. Focus isn't magic. They are built, brick by brick, day by day." Ryan understood. This was a process. There were no shortcuts, no tricks, no hacks. The only way forward was patience, awareness, and consistent practice. He started applying these lessons beyond the library. At home, he set aside specific hours for studying without his phone. He meditated for a few minutes each morning, simply noticing his thoughts and bringing his attention back to his breath. He learned to prioritize, to schedule, to respect his own mind. He didn't become perfect overnight. He still slipped sometimes, letting notifications steal his attention, letting worries pull him away. But he noticed faster. He returned quicker. And that small, incremental improvement began to compound. By the end of the semester, Ryan's grades improved. He remembered more. He completed tasks on time. He felt more confident, more capable. Most importantly, he felt like he had control over his own mind, rather than being a passenger in it. The lessons weren't just about studying or school. They were about life. Discipline, awareness, and focus shaped the decisions he made, the relationships he nurtured, and the opportunities he pursued. He realized that a scattered mind was like a boat without a rudder, it drifted wherever the current took it. A disciplined mind was a vessel with direction, capable of reaching any shore it desired. One evening, as Ryan packed up his bag and prepared to leave the library, he paused and looked back at the professor. The old man was reading quietly, the pocket watch ticking steadily beside him. Ryan smiled, feeling gratitude he couldn't fully express. The path ahead was still long, but for the first time, he felt like he was walking it with purpose. And he knew this was only the beginning. At the end of the semester, Ryan reflected on his journey. The struggles, the failures, the restless nights, they were all part of the process. He realized that discipline and focus were not natural talents. They were skills. And skills could be learned, practiced, and strengthened. He understood that life would always offer distractions. the world would never stop pulling at his attention. But he now had the tools to choose what deserved it. That choice, simple, conscious, daily, was more powerful than luck, intelligence, or talent. Ryan had begun mastering his mind, and with it, he had begun mastering his future. College life didn't pause just because Ryan had started training his mind. The city around him pulsed with constant distraction, the hum of traffic, the flash of notifications, the chatter of friends, the endless lure of entertainment. Each day presented the same challenge: stay focused while the world insisted on pulling him away. At first, it was exhausting. Old habits die hard. Every morning he told himself to stay disciplined, but temptation appeared almost immediately. A funny video popped up while he opened a textbook. A text from a friend promising a night out. A sudden craving for coffee or snack. Every distraction was a test, and often he failed. But the lessons from Professor Alden were now embedded in his mind. He noticed when his attention drifted. He paused, took a deep breath, and returned to the task at hand. Sometimes it worked immediately, other times, it took several attempts. But each time he regained focus, it felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of his own power. One afternoon, a major project deadline loomed. Ryan's team had left much of the work to the last minute, and his anxiety spiked. His first instinct was panic. The usual spiral of distraction threatened: check social media, scroll for inspiration, put off writing the report. But he remembered the glass of water exercise, the pocket watch, the countless hours in the library learning to catch wandering thoughts. He closed his eyes, centered himself, and began. One task at a time. He ignored the noise outside, the chatter of roommates, the persistent pull of his phone. He made a list, broke the project into pieces, and focused on completing the first section. Then the second. Then the third. Hours passed without him noticing. It wasn't effortless, but it was steady. By the end of the night, the project was finished. Not perfect, but complete, on time, and done with attention to detail. The feeling was different from any accomplishment he had before. There was pride, yes, but more than that, there was clarity. He had controlled his mind when it tried to run away. He had chosen focus, and that choice had created results. The professor's teachings weren't just about school. They were about life. Ryan began noticing patterns in everything around him: how much time he wasted, how easily he was swayed by noise, how small, consistent acts of discipline compounded into meaningful change. A 10-minute morning meditation didn't seem like much, but over weeks it sharpened his awareness. A study session without distraction seemed minor, but over months it built confidence. Then came the social test. His friends invited him out for a weekend getaway. Normally, he would have said yes immediately, guilt-free, and spent the weekend avoiding his responsibilities. But now, he paused. He considered the cost: assignments left unfinished, projects delayed, sleep lost, stress piling up. He realized that focus wasn't only about mental exercises. It was about choices. Discipline was about aligning actions with long-term goals rather than fleeting pleasures. For the first time, he said no. He stayed home, worked on assignments, and even managed to finish a personal writing project he'd abandoned months earlier. It was uncomfortable at first. Friends teased him, calling him boring or too serious. But Ryan didn't waver. He discovered that discipline didn't mean isolation, it meant knowing when and where to give attention, and when to withhold it. The city became his training ground. The noise didn't disappear, but he learned to move through it. The subway rides, the crowded coffee shops, the bustling classrooms, all became places where he could practice awareness, noticing the pull of distraction and choosing focus instead. One night, after a long day, he returned to the library, carrying a small notebook filled with reflections. Professor Alden looked up, smiled faintly, and gestured to the chair across from him. Ryan opened the notebook and showed the professor the exercises he'd written for himself: lists, notes on meditation, reminders of where his mind wandered and how he redirected it. The professor nodded slowly. "Discipline is built in action," he said. Theory is nothing without practice. Each day, each decision, each moment of returning your mind to your purpose, that is how mastery grows. Ryan felt a surge of understanding. Focus wasn't magic. It wasn't instant. It was cumulative. Every choice mattered. Every moment of attention reclaimed strengthened him. Then came the first real academic challenge, a timed problem-solving competition announced by the college. Students had to answer complex questions under pressure, with distractions allowed in the testing room. Others panicked, flipping through papers, whispering to neighbors, tapping their pencils nervously. Ryan, however, applied what he had learned. He imagined the glass of water, steady in his hands. He reminded himself that the task was only one piece of the whole. He took a deep breath and tackled each question deliberately, focusing entirely on one at a time. The minutes ticked by, but he didn't glance at the clock. He didn't let anxiety creep in. He simply moved forward. When the results were posted, Ryan's name was at the top. He had won. Not because he was the smartest in the room, not because he had luck on his side, but because he had mastered his own mind. For the first time, Ryan understood the truth of Professor Alden's teachings: talent, intelligence, and opportunity are wasted without discipline. A scattered mind will always falter, but a trained mind can achieve far beyond its apparent limits. It wasn't arrogance that Ryan felt that night. It was calm confidence. He knew there would be more challenges, more temptations, more distractions. But he also knew he had learned the essential skill to direct his attention consciously, to reclaim his focus at will. The lessons extended beyond academics. In conversations with friends, in decisions about jobs, in planning his future, he applied the same principles. He was more present. He listened more attentively. He acted more deliberately. Every small decision reinforced the habit of focus, every moment of conscious attention strengthened his resolve. Ryan realized that life would never be free of distractions. The city would always hum, the world would always call. But now, he had the ability to navigate the noise. The choices were his. The control was his. By the end of the semester, Ryan reflected on the transformation. He was no longer the restless, scattered student who spent hours avoiding work. He was intentional, disciplined, and aware. Not perfect, but far stronger than he had ever imagined. The professor never promised easy change. He never offered quick fixes or magic formulas. All he offered was guidance, exercises, and insight into the way the mind works. And Ryan had done the rest. Focus, he realized, wasn't a gift. It was a skill. A choice. And with that realization, Ryan felt a freedom he had never known, the freedom to move through life with purpose, clarity, and strength. Ryan had learned the rhythm of focus, the muscle of attention, the art of returning to the task at hand. He had trained his mind in the library, in his apartment, even on the bustling city streets. He had built habits, disciplined routines, and a small but growing confidence in his own ability to stay present. But life doesn't test you gradually. It doesn't wait for you to feel ready. The ultimate test always comes suddenly, like a storm appearing on an otherwise calm horizon. It came in the form of a national academic competition announced in his college. Students from all over the country were invited to solve complex problems under intense time constraints. The questions were tricky, the environment chaotic, and the pressure immense. Many of the competitors were top students with long resumes and confident demeanors. Ryan knew he could not rely on talent alone. The night before the competition, his apartment felt unusually quiet. He had prepared every possible formula, memorized every important principle, practiced every strategy. Yet anxiety crept in, reminding him of every time his mind had wandered, every test he had failed in the past. He realized that no matter how much knowledge he had, without focus, it meant nothing. The next morning, Ryan arrived at the competition hall early. The space buzzed with nervous energy, the students murmuring, pens scratching, monitors flickering, time ticking. The environment was designed to create distraction, to test the mind's ability to hold steady under pressure. Ryan took a seat, placed his materials carefully, and paused. He closed his eyes for a brief moment and took a deep breath. He imagined the glass of water from his early lessons, imagined the steady rhythm of the pocket watch. The chaos around him existed, but it did not control him. When the competition began, he focused on one question at a time. He did not rush. He did not glance at the clock obsessively. His mind returned repeatedly to the task in front of him, gently redirecting itself whenever a thought threatened to wander. Every small action, every deliberate movement of pen across paper, reinforced the skill he had spent months cultivating. Around him, other students panicked. Some skipped questions, some erased answers repeatedly, some whispered anxiously. The noise, the pressure, the presence of others who seemed more prepared, all of it was there. Yet Ryan remained steady, immersed in the work before him. Time passed in a blur. The problems grew increasingly complex, designed to force even the sharpest minds into error. But Ryan applied the same principle: break each problem into parts, focus on one step at a time, stay aware, stay present. By the time the competition ended, Ryan felt exhausted but composed. He had completed every question to the best of his ability, without letting distraction or panic break his concentration. When the results were announced, his name was at the top. He had won. Not because he was smarter than everyone else, not because he had luck on his side, but because he had mastered the one thing that truly mattered: his own mind. The victory was more than a trophy or a certificate. It was proof of a deeper truth: talent alone is not enough. Intelligence alone is not enough. Discipline and focus create results where raw ability may fail. Returning to his apartment, Ryan reflected on the journey. He remembered the countless times he had failed before. He remembered the spilled glass of water, the pocket watch, the exercises in the library. Each small lesson, each repeated effort, each moment of returning to focus, had led to this moment. He realized that the city, the distractions, the noise, none of it could overpower the disciplined mind. Focus was not about eliminating life's chaos. It was about learning to move through it with awareness and control. Over the following weeks, Ryan's life changed subtly but profoundly. His grades improved consistently. His ability to plan and execute tasks became sharper. Even his interactions with friends and family reflected a new presence. He listened more attentively, responded more thoughtfully, and made deliberate choices rather than reacting impulsively. The professor's influence remained steady in his mind. Every time Ryan felt overwhelmed, he recalled the lessons learned. The mind is like a lens, focus is like a muscle, discipline is built brick by brick, day by day. And in the quiet moments, when the city lights blinked against the night sky, Ryan understood that mastery of the mind was more valuable than any accomplishment, more reliable than luck, more enduring than raw intelligence. It was the foundation upon which everything else in life could be built. Discipline and focus were not just tools. They were freedom. By the end of the year, Ryan had become known among his peers not just for his accomplishments, but for his presence. People noticed how he seemed calm in chaos, how he acted with intention, how he completed tasks with quiet confidence. They didn't know the hours he had spent training his mind, the mistakes, the failures, the moments of doubt. They only saw the results: a young man who had learned to master himself. And Ryan knew this was only the beginning. Life would always test him, always present new distractions and challenges. But now he possessed the most important skill of all: the ability to return to focus, to reclaim control, and to direct his mind toward what truly mattered. The victories were sweeter because they were earned, not by chance, but by the quiet, consistent effort of a disciplined mind. By the time he next visited Professor Alden, Ryan understood that the journey was ongoing. The professor smiled knowingly, seeing not just the achievements, but the transformation within. The quiet mastery of focus, once a struggle, had become a habit, a guiding principle in every aspect of Ryan's life. Discipline, awareness, and persistence, these were the pillars he now carried forward. And he knew that no storm, no distraction, no external chaos could shake what he had built inside himself. Ryan had discovered a truth that few realize: a focused mind is more powerful than talent, more reliable than luck, and stronger than intelligence. With it, any goal was attainable. With it, any challenge could be met. With it, life could be navigated not as a chaotic rush, but as a deliberate journey. Months had passed since the national competition. Ryan had proven to himself what the professor had been teaching all along: mastery of the mind was more powerful than talent, luck, or intelligence. But life didn't stop testing him once he learned to focus. New challenges arrived in subtle ways: internships, complex projects, relationships, and the constant pull of a noisy world. Ryan approached them differently now. Where he once panicked or procrastinated, he paused and assessed. Where he once gave his attention to everything and everyone, he learned to choose deliberately. The city still hummed around him, relentless, pulling at his mind from every direction, but he moved through it with calm awareness. One evening, he walked through campus toward the library, carrying a notebook filled with reflections, plans, and reminders of his daily practices. He had set goals for his internship, mapped out projects, and even written a plan for personal development. Nothing was rigid. Everything was intentional. Every choice was conscious. The professor was there, in his usual window seat, sipping tea and watching the city lights. Ryan approached without hesitation. He had no questions this time. He had reflections to share, and he simply sat down, opened his notebook, and began reading aloud to himself, narrating his progress, his victories, and the lessons he had absorbed. He realized that mastery of focus had changed more than his grades or achievements. It had changed how he viewed himself. He had learned patience, self-discipline, and the value of consistent effort. He understood that life would always offer distractions, that perfection was impossible, and that true power came from returning to the path over and over again, no matter how many times one strayed. The professor smiled, quietly acknowledging the transformation. There were no dramatic accolades, no applause. Just a simple recognition of a student who had learned the art of self-mastery. Ryan's world had changed. Tasks that once overwhelmed him now felt manageable. Challenges that used to induce panic now became opportunities for measured action. Even social interactions were richer because he listened fully, engaged fully, and acted intentionally. He began mentoring younger students, teaching them what he had learned. He didn't give them shortcuts or guarantees. He taught them awareness, focus, and discipline, and watched them struggle and grow, just as he had. He understood that the real reward wasn't the competition, the awards, or the grades. The reward was mastery over one's own mind, and the ability to apply that mastery in every corner of life. Ryan also learned the importance of balance. Discipline didn't mean rigid schedules or endless work. It meant creating space for meaningful activities, relationships, and rest. It meant knowing when to act and when to pause. It meant aligning every choice with long-term purpose rather than fleeting distractions. The city continued to roar, but Ryan no longer felt tossed by its noise. He could walk through crowded streets and remain present. He could sit in cafes and study without distraction. He could complete projects under pressure without panic. He had built a fortress within himself, not of isolation, but of awareness, focus, and deliberate attention. Looking back, he remembered the first lesson, the glass of water, the pocket watch, the countless small exercises. Each seemed simple, almost insignificant at the time. But together, they had shaped a foundation for everything that followed. Small actions, repeated consistently, had transformed a scattered, restless mind into one capable of intentional action and calm mastery. Ryan knew that life would continue to test him and that distractions would never end. But he also knew that mastery of the mind was a lifelong journey. Every day offered the chance to practice, to grow, to reclaim attention. Every challenge was an opportunity to strengthen focus and discipline. He felt gratitude for the professor, for the lessons, for the failures that had forced him to notice his weaknesses, and for the small victories that had reminded him of his potential. He understood now that discipline was not punishment, but freedom. Focus was not restriction, but power. Ryan's story became an inspiration in his community. Friends, classmates, and younger students noticed the calm in his presence, the clarity in his actions, and the consistency in his achievements. They asked for advice, and Ryan shared what he had learned. Start small, notice when your mind wanders, return attention to what matters, and persist every day. Life, he realized, is not about controlling every external circumstance. It is about mastering the internal landscape of the mind. When that is done, everything else aligns. Opportunities are seized. Challenges are faced with clarity. Goals are achieved with intention. Ryan often returned to the library, sitting in the window seat now vacant after Professor Alden's retirement. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined the glass of water, the ticking of the watch, and the countless moments when he had trained his mind to return, again and again, to what mattered most. The memories brought a quiet smile. The journey had not been easy, but it had been transformative. He understood a truth that few grasp: the mind is the most powerful tool we possess, and mastery over it allows a life of freedom, achievement, and fulfillment. Discipline and focus are not innate gifts. They are choices, cultivated over time, reinforced by awareness and deliberate action. Ryan knew that every day offered a new chance to practice, a new challenge to face, and a new opportunity to reclaim his focus. And with that knowledge, he walked forward, ready to face whatever the world placed before him, not as a restless student, but as a young man who had learned the art of mastering his mind. The ultimate lesson was clear: true success is not measured by trophies, grades, or accolades. It is measured by the power to direct your own mind, the ability to choose attention over distraction, and the courage to cultivate discipline in every moment. Ryan had learned this lesson, and he carried it into every corner of his life. Every challenge, every task, every interaction was an opportunity to practice focus, to exercise discipline, and to live with intention. He knew that the journey of mastering the mind never truly ends, and that was the beauty of it. Because with each day, each choice, each conscious act of attention, he grew stronger, wiser, and more capable. And that was the beginning of everything.